episode 28. She is defying the odds, giving current and former convicts, herself, and the rest of us a second chance. Meet social entrepreneur Kat Hoke. Welcome to The Art of Excellence, a show about people doing extraordinary things in their lives. I'm your host, Glenn Zweig. Thanks for joining me. My guest today is Kat Hoke. Kat is the founder and CEO of Defy Ventures, a nonprofit which creates personal and economic opportunities for people with criminal histories. She's been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and a number of other publications. Her new book is called A Second Chance for You, for me, and for the rest of us. Kat, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, I love the story when you were growing up about your sitting around the family dinner table, having 60 seconds to pitch an idea. It sounds like the entrepreneurial bug was planted pretty early on.
Yeah, it was. My father is very innovative and entrepreneurial.
This was like a regular weekly thing that you had to do?
I don't know that it came at a regular cadence. It kind of felt like my all-the-time life.
Your all-the-time life? So did that mean back then you said some way, in some capacity in the future, you want to do something on your own? Did you sort of know that back then, or was that not anywhere in the back of your mind yet?
So I didn't even know what the word entrepreneurship really meant. I didn't have my mind set out to become an entrepreneur. I thought I was going to become a lawyer or a doctor. My father wanted me to follow in his footsteps to become an engineer. And so I was entrepreneurial without even knowing all the business stuff around it.
So let's sort of fast forward here, right? You graduate from school, Berkeley, I believe. Is that right?
Correct.
You're in your 20s. There you are working on Wall Street with this really lucrative and prestigious private equity job. And then your friend invites you to visit a Texas prison. So talk about that trip.
So I had been working in venture capital and private equity, and at 25, I could see that I was really good at doing deals, but I could also see that many people who had amassed a good amount of wealth were not all necessarily satisfied by their financial achievements. And so I started looking for my calling or purpose in life. And I started asking a lot of successful executives, if you died today, why would your life even matter? I started kissing a lot of frogs, investigating everything. And a friend of mine came over for dinner in New York. She was a JP Morgan executive at the time. And she's the one who invited me on a prison trip in Texas. And my first reaction was, no, thank you. Because although I wanted to find my calling and my purpose and see how I could make a difference in the world, prison was never something that I had considered before. Because when I was 12 years old, a good friend of mine was brutally murdered by two 16-year-old boys. And so in my mind at the time, anyone who was in prison was like the scum of the earth. They could rot and die in that place. I was very tough on crime in my mentality.
It's interesting. You know, the stereotype is you're supposed to wait till your midlife crisis to sort of figure out what the meaning of life is and should you reinvent yourself. And you're doing it, pretty early on, like just a couple of years or something out of school. Like, why do you think you went through that so early on in life?
I'm a big picture person and I like to know the end game. And when I could see that so many people that I looked up to from a business and a deal-making standpoint, when I could see that they seemed so dissatisfied, it caused me to question everything. I talk about this in my book, but once I got out of work and I was in Palo Alto walking down the sidewalk, and I saw this guy who had a new Porsche, and he was screaming like a crazy possessed man on the sidewalk. And I guess his new car had just been keyed. And when I saw the venom that was coming out of his heart, it shocked me. And I've always felt like if we work that hard to own these things, well, this thing owned this guy. And it's amazing to me to see that people who make it, a lot of times, are they really achieving that freedom, or are they just getting more entangled and more incarcerated by their own wealth or their own privilege sometimes. So, and also like a lot of people who are very successful, some of them don't even like their work. Some of them work 70 or 80 hours a week. They say that they love their families, but they're not there with their families. So if they're unhappy and unfulfilled, but they become like a slave to their own wealth, I looked at that when I was 25 and I was like, is this really what I want in life? And it wasn't.
So you get to this Texas prison system with all of your biases and predispositions with you. And what did you see? What did you learn? How did you walk away from it?
Yeah, well, I guess first what I'll say is the reason that I chose to take a chance and overcome or think past some of my biases is because a woman who invited me, she really challenged me. And she said, like, have you ever had a second chance? Do you think other people deserve second chances? And I've had so many second chances in my life, so many. And the way that she spoke about it made me interested. Curious, I guess would be the right word. So I showed up and I flew from New York to Texas and I went on, it was a tour. And at Defy, we don't do tours, but in this case, I went on a tour. I went to 4 different prisons. I met men, I met women at one women's prison. I went to death row. I went to ADSEG. I had a pretty administrative segregation where people go when they get in trouble inside prison. I had a pretty full experience for those days. And I was terrified when I walked in the prison gates the first time, just as many of our volunteers are. But the minute that I started speaking with the men and the women that I met, I felt convicted over the hardness of my own heart. I felt convicted over my own judgments. I was not showing up expecting to meet human beings. I really thought I was going to go see these wild caged animals, the way that people are often portrayed in the news. And I was absolutely judging people for the moment of their worst thought process in their entire lives. And when I shook their hands and looked them in the eye and learned about their stories, I found myself overwhelmed with empathy for the first time for this population. The first person that I met, his name was Johnny. And when Johnny was 8 years old, he watched as his grandfather murdered his father in front of him. And then a couple of years later, he was jumped into a gang and given drugs to sell. And by 18, he was incarcerated. And I wish I could tell you that Johnny had a one-off unique story, but unfortunately, it's really not. Most of the people that I spend my life serving today were victimized as children. They were traumatized. They were abused, neglected, abandoned, and they never had a positive legal vision. So I realized on that first visit that I was trained by my university professor, father/inventor, to take my SATs and to get into college and to get a good job. And most of the people that I serve have effectively been trained to go to prison. Prison's kind of a rite of passage. You don't want to go to prison, but you're partaking in activities that you know will lead you there. And I realized right off the jump meeting these guys that not only had they made bad decisions, now they're paying their debt to society when they're inside. But I wasn't just talking to a group of aspiring entrepreneurs. I was speaking with a group of proven entrepreneurs who had misdirected their skill sets. Not everyone in prison had success as a drug dealer or as a gang member or leader, but many people outside of prison don't realize that gangs and drug rings are run by boards of directors, and they have bylaws, and they have bookkeepers and accountants, and they have nicer margins than most businesses that you've invested in or looked at. They have a sales channel, and they hadn't mastered their risk management strategies because they all got busted when they went to prison. But I asked myself the question, what would happen if these people were equipped to go legit with their skills?
And so again, just to fast forward, you took that kernel of an idea, you quit your job, you started an organization at the time called Prison Entrepreneurship Program, where you would work with prisoners throughout Texas. I'm curious, when you quit this perfectly good paying private equity job on Wall Street to go work in the Texas prison system, were your friends and family supportive, or did they think you'd gone off the deep end?
I think a few people might have been supportive, but it's hard to remember that given all the negativity that I was facing. People who loved me very much, who mentored me, told me that I was wasting my time, that I had far greater talents and abilities than to work with this population. And many people thought I had just lost my mind. People feared for me because they thought that I was going to do something really dangerous. had a handful, I'm sure, of supporters, but the hate definitely stands out more than the support at the very beginning.
It's an incredible organization. It got off to a tremendous start. At some point along the way, it seemed that the organization's success and your personal life started to move maybe in opposite directions. So while the organization was in the national spotlight, getting all sorts of attention, it was a very innovative thing at the time. You were going through some challenges. You had a difficult divorce, and then you eventually ended up resigning due to some improper behavior. Can you talk a little bit about that period of your life?
Sure. So I was married the first time. I'm remarried now. I was married the first time at the age of 22. So I started this program in Texas, and I was immersed in a very Christian community where people say things all the time like God hates divorce and divorce is sin. And I said the one thing that I would never become was divorced. So I was divorced. I was married for 9 years. And at the 9-year mark, I was served divorce papers, and it came unexpectedly to me. And for 5 years, I had been running prison entrepreneurship program in Texas. I missed many opportunities to be a wife. I was on the road, and I had, tunnel vision on building up my organization. And after realizing that I hadn't been the wife that I had wanted to be and being given divorce papers, I felt tremendous shame. And instead of reaching out to a support network of people who could have been there for me in my time of hardship, the only people that I felt comfortable confiding in, for the most part, were people who had also messed up. And most of these people that I shared my pain with were people with criminal histories. They were men. They had been graduates of my program. They got out of prison. They understand what it's like to fail. So after I was divorced, I went through like a really tough, lonely period. When I had to move out of my house, I got back-to-back pneumonias, was hospitalized. And in a moment of weakness, I crossed boundaries, and I had relationships with people who had been released from the Texas prison system. And what I did was not illegal, but it went against my own values. I knew better as a leader. I knew that the Texas prison system would frown upon my decision, and I regret my decisions to this day. My honesty ended up costing me, at the time, it felt like everything in my life. When the Texas prison system asked me, "Did you do this?" I said, "Yes, I did." And then they forced my resignation very publicly. They forced it in the news. And so my sex scandal went out across national news. It even made it into some global news. And when I saw what people were writing about me on the internet, I wanted my life to be over. I felt like the most disgusting human being alive. I couldn't believe that I had ruined my own calling and purpose. And so that was a dark period for me.
So when you're going through that dark period, how do you find the way to climb out of the abyss? Like, what was the turning point for you?
So before my scandal hit the news, at PEP, Prison Entrepreneurship Program, we had 7,500 supporters at the time, some people that I respected more than anyone in the world. I sent out a full disclosure letter with my mistakes. I was so ashamed to do that, but I said, here's what I've done. And I didn't even know that I'd have to leave the organization altogether at the time. I thought that that the Texas prison system wouldn't let me back inside prison. But then they put in the news that if I didn't leave the organization altogether, they would shut down the entire organization. So I thought I would at least get to fundraise, even if they didn't let me back in prison. Anyway, when I sent that letter disclosing my poor choices, I was met with love and grace. And people said, "You've preached nothing but love and grace and second chances for all these years. And what are you doing next?" And I didn't have a next because I'm an all-in person. A small group of amazing mentors loved me back to life. And in particular, there was a man and a woman, a couple named Andrea and Bill, and they became like adopted parents to me. And Bill was the first person to call me, and he'd been a big donor to our work. And he said, "Sweetie, we love you, and there's nothing that you could do that would take our love away from you. And why don't you come and stay with us for a while, and we'll love you back to life." And I didn't understand why these two people, I frankly didn't know them very well, why they would take me in and why they would care for me that way. But they did. I took the next year off, and I went through major therapy. All this happened about 8 years ago. And I went through a lot of therapy and deep work of looking inside. And I had always been a provider and a caretaker of others. So my own image and vision of myself started to change. For the first time, I wasn't producing any results for anybody, but seeing that people loved me just for me, not for the results that I was producing, started to have a healing effect on my life. And also that, I guess, one benefit of having a public shaming is that although a lot of people bashed me on the internet, few people had the courage to do that to my face. I also received forgiveness from so many people who loved me and accepted me, even though they knew some of the worst things that I had done.
In hindsight, it's somewhat ironic that, here you are devoting your life to giving people a second chance. And for a long time, you didn't feel you were personally deserving of that second chance. So I guess you needed others to tell you the same message you had been telling others for several years.
Absolutely. And now that I have gone through such an intense public shaming experience, I actually have a lot more grace and mercy for myself. I came to understand grace much better. And so I think I still to this day carry more grace for myself. Like I know I'm going to continue messing up. It's like if you're a straight A kid and you have never gotten a B in your life, your first B can feel, or B plus can feel traumatizing and angering. But if you're used to failing a lot, and then you know that you're going to get back on your feet, and you know that you still have worth, even if you didn't perform as well as you wanted to, that can lead to a different outlook on life. So now I know that I'm going to continue to make mistakes because I'm a human being. I like to think I'm very, very good at learning from my mistakes. But seeing the way that people had this selfless love for me has made me that much more of an advocate for second chances for other people, for people with criminal histories, but also for pretty much anybody.
Well, you would get your second chance by launching Defy Ventures. It's an organization teaching entrepreneurial and life skills to prisoners all over the country. The primary program of it is called CEO of Your New Life. Talk about that program a bit. What are the classes like? What are the skills that you're trying to teach them?
Sure. So 7 years ago, I started Defy as my second chance to give second chances to others. Or if you really knew their backgrounds, you might realize that it's a legitimate first chance. And in CEO of Your New Life, we teach entrepreneurship and business management, but that's only about 30% of the program. The other 70% of the program are things that you and I probably grew up learning that many of our incarcerated EITs is what I call them, entrepreneurs in training. They didn't necessarily learn these things. So everything from 8 hours of Emily Post etiquette training and basic technology training, like how to turn on a computer. Because when you've been locked up for 20 years, you don't even have an email address. You don't know what Gmail is. You've heard of apps, but it feels like a foreign language. It's so overwhelming. We do a lot of character development, parenting training, forgiveness and shame reduction. They learn the 5 love languages, anger management. The program is holistic. And on the business standpoint, our population that we serve, I believe, is a lot more naturally entrepreneurial than the general population in the United States because many of them were raised in poverty and had to fend for themselves from a young age. And so our slogan at Defy is transform your hustle. And so we teach them everything from business ideation, how to come up with a good business idea that can make fast legal money.
Key distinction there.
Yeah, to how to do public speaking, how to approach investors. Some of our courses are taught by Harvard and Stanford MBA professors. We have our ideation courses and how to create a business model is taught by Seth Godin. We are spoiled with some of the best of the best. And after finishing 100 courses, and it takes about 9 months to complete it, then they have to pass a final exam, and we have a 94% pass rate. Our curriculum has been vetted by Baylor University's MBA program, and our EITs, our entrepreneurs in training, earn a Baylor University MBA program certificate. It's a really big deal for them because they average an 8th grade education, and so a lot of times finishing Defy is one of the proudest achievements of their lires.
Well, you mentioned the entrepreneurial aspect, and then you mentioned the life skills. You include a lot of stories from the graduates, and they're amazing to read. It felt to me like this is so much beyond even those skills. it's really at its core giving people hope. It's about having the courage to start anew. It's about dignity and respect. It's about really reprioritizing your entire life. And so I was curious, was that emotional journey that they go through, was that built into the program by design, or did it just sort of happen over time, on its own?
Yeah, it's absolutely built in from design. We work with people who tend to survive without hope or with very, very little hope. Their self-esteem is low because after you've been locked up for 10 or 20 years and you get dehumanized every day serving time, if you don't have a vision, for a positive legal vision for yourself, why would you even try? 76.6% of people are rearrested and go back to prison. And so once you're already arrested and you have a felony, America, we like to say that we're the land of second chances, but there's so many employers who will permanently discriminate against you, even if you were charged with holding an ounce of weed 20 years ago. And so if you don't have the self-esteem or any hope to try, you're probably not going to try. So the first thing that we do is that we bring hope. And I look at them and I tell them, I believe in you. I don't even know you. I don't know your past. You don't like your past. I don't like your past. The people that we serve have made grave mistakes, and I never make excuses for what they've done. But 95% of them are coming back to our communities. So when I look at them, I say, based on what the other thousands of EITs have done before you, I absolutely know that you have what it takes to make it if you apply yourself and if you're done with being a criminal. So I also tell them, at Defy, we don't work with criminals, and they're all sitting there in their prison uniforms, so they kind of look at me funny. And I say, we work with people who have committed criminal acts in their past, and there's a really big difference. So if you were living criminally, because people do criminal things inside prison all the time, but if you were living criminally up until last night or this morning before you came here, if you're willing to lay it down and start fresh, then I believe in you, and this is exactly what I vouch for, what I spend my life advocating for. If you want to keep doing the same old, if you want to stay comfortable, keep doing time and crime, get out. And if you don't leave, then we will kick you out so quickly, because we find out. We know a lot of what's going on in the behind-the-scenes stuff when I'm not there. And we work with correctional officials to make sure, because Defy is a big opportunity and privilege for the people that we serve. And so we want to make sure that they're taking it seriously. But so many of the people that we serve have not had a program or an opportunity in all of these years. We intentionally target underserved, remote facilities that are hard to get to. So when we walk in, they sit up straight. And it's amazing how a little bit of hope can go such a long way. So after they start to believe in themselves, then we also teach them the tangible skills. This is not some pie in the sky type of hope.
One of the hurdles your students have to overcome is taking responsibility and holding themselves accountable for their past actions. How hard is that for them? Taking full ownership, if you will, over their past.
What I would say, Glenn, is that that's not one of the hardest things. Most of them live with deep remorse every single day for what they've done. They know that they've screwed up. The toughest crime category for me to work with typically is people who have committed white-collar crime, because a lot of times those people will say, I was framed, wrong place at the wrong time, I didn't really do it, but most of the people that I work with have committed really serious, often violent crimes, and they take ownership of it, and they take responsibility. We take that responsibility to the next level to make sure that they really understood where that behavior came from. But what we have to work with is to say, take responsibility and ownership for what you did, but beating yourself up in shame every day, shame does no good for anyone. Regret and remorse are very important, because if you don't have regret and remorse, if you don't take responsibility, then you're more likely to repeat your behavior. Sociopaths don't really have empathy or remorse. They don't, and I haven't met one of those. The people that I work with have remorse, but when remorse leads to shame, what I teach them is shame is kicking yourself when you're already down. The system can only incarcerate your physical body. We're the only ones who can incarcerate our heads and our hearts. So that's why the most important thing that I preach above entrepreneurship is on forgiveness. Because when we don't forgive, we live in the past. And if you want to be shackled to your past permanently, you're not going to be your best self. And what I tell them is many of your victims and your victims' families, I'm sure that they want you to rot in hell, rot in here, and not have another existence. But I believe that if most victims were emotionally healthy people, they would want the person who offended them to pay their debt to society, but to also spend every day from this day forward working on the best version of themselves so they don't continue to repeat their crimes. If people are not rehabilitated, they're going to go back to the only thing that they know.
So just to clarify, when you talk about forgiveness, we're talking about they're having the ability to forgive themselves. Is that what it comes down to?
Well, it's more than just themselves. It's forgiving yourself. Sometimes it's forgiving the system for the way that you've been treated. So many of our people have been sentenced unfairly because of a lack of economic resources or the color of their skin. It's forgiving God, and it's forgiving other people who hurt you as well. Some of our guys are serving a lot of time because they were sold out by a so-called partner who snitched on them. Some of them are falsely accused. So that's a lot of anger that builds up. And I tell them, think about the most unforgivable thing that has happened to you in your life, that you've done to somebody else or that has been done to you. And when you think about that most unforgivable thing, what are the feelings that brew in your heart? I mean, Glenn, if I ask you, when you think about the least forgivable thing in your life that's happened to you or that you've done it, what are the feelings that brew in your heart?
Well, we had a technical error when we started this podcast, so that's got to be up there somewhere. You're absolutely right. It's like we're looking at these people through a lens of something which is a very, very bad, dark, and usually one-time incident in their lives. And if we all were held up to that through that same lens, how would we look to others? How would we feel? And yeah, it'd be terrible. I guess that's how you ultimately have to try to create empathy here.
Yeah. And if they don't forgive themselves, then they're choosing to live with a big ball of hatred or resentment or vengeance or depression or anxiety. It can lead to health problems and sleeplessness. And they also become like a ticking time bomb. Any of us who don't work through our pain and carry that pain around, the next little thing can set us off. And I say, like, when was the last time that your anger chose for you? And the problem or the hard thing about forgiving yourself is that often we don't feel like forgiving ourselves. We don't feel like we deserve it. We feel like we have to earn it. And I tell them all, you can't take your crime away. You can't bring your victim back. You can't do that. And forgiveness is not a feeling. Forgiveness is a choice. It's a decision. And it's often one that we have to reaffirm every single day. So we have to say, I forgive me, or I forgive him. And then maybe one day our feelings will start to align with our decision. But if we want freedom, even those of us who live on this side of the fences, if we want freedom, but we allow ourselves to be trapped in hatred and unforgiveness, that's a choice. But I can guarantee you that unforgiveness and that anger will make life choices for you. So if you want a better future, then start living for the future. And the way to do that is to forgive your past.
Part of the program entails the prisoners volunteering information about their past lives. As an example, in just one of your cohorts, I think you said something to the effect of 2/3 of the prisoners had lost a family member before the age of 18. 90% of them had violence taking place against them as children, and the list goes on and on. We can't possibly ever put ourselves in their shoes. And it's like you said earlier, they never really had a fighting chance to begin with. The deck was stacked against them day one. But as a society, we're not very empathetic toward this prison population. We just fixate over and over on the crime and punishment and not the other angle. Like, why is that? And how do we start to change that perception?
I think the reason that citizens who are not incarcerated don't show empathy is because there's sometimes a comfort in this othering of other people. So we say, we're in the good pile, they're in the bad pile, they've done bad things, so I can write them off. But what I like to tell people, I speak to very large audiences on a regular basis, and I'll tell you the questions that I ask right now, and your listeners can participate in this. But I say, everybody start by standing up. Now, if you've never done a single thing that you're ashamed of in your entire life, sit down. No one sits down. Then I say, all the way back to your childhood. If you've never done anything criminal in your life, sit down. But before you do, consider that getting in your car after drinking one too many drinks, that's a criminal thing. Trespassing on a property that wasn't yours if you TP'd a house as a teenager, that's criminal. Holding the weed in your hand before you smoked it in most states, at least up until recently, that's criminal. So if you've never done anything criminal in your life, go ahead and sit down. And there are 2 or 3 goody two-shoes in a large crowd who will usually sit down. And then I tell people, now think back to your childhood. If you've never done anything violent in your life, sit down. But consider that something violent includes if you pulled your sister's hair, if you pushed a boy in the park because he was picking on you. Those are violent things. So nearly the entire audience is still standing. And then I tell them, all those of you who are standing, had you been convicted of the crime that you committed, you are all what politicians call violent offenders, the kind that people say are irredeemable. A lot of times when people hear that, they roll their eyes at me and they think I'm exaggerating or being silly because they were 10 when they pushed a boy in the park. And then what I tell them is, you might not realize this, but about a quarter of the people that I serve at Defy were first incarcerated by the age of 10 for the exact same things that you're standing up for right now. I was in prison 2 weeks ago. There were 2 guys there who are grown men now who were first incarcerated at the age of 7. And I asked one of them, what was he first incarcerated for? He said his mom was a drug addict and there was no food in the house, so he broke into his neighbor's house for some food. Imagine a little 7-year-old, usually a prison cell looks very small, but imagine a 7-year-old in cuffs and then in a prison cell all by themselves. We are a nation that loves to lock people up. And so it's really easy when you have not been arrested for something, especially if you're rich and you're white and you can talk your way out of just about anything or make phone calls to people who will defend you. It's really easy to look at those people, especially those people who committed violent crime, and to say that they're evil or they're awful or they should rot. But that's because, I don't know, maybe sometimes we like to think that we're better than other people. Maybe it makes us feel good about ourselves or something like that.
Well, you write in the book about how most of us, if not all of us, while we might not have ever been in a physical prison, that we live in our own personal prisons. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, we can live in a mental prison. People tell me all the time, like, oh, it's so great that you follow your calling and that you feel fulfilled with your work. I wish I could do that, but I can't. And I say, oh, really, why not? And they're like, well, because I have 3 kids in private schools and their private schools cost $40,000 a year and this and that. People have so many excuses and are willing to live a dissatisfied life. And that's a choice. That's fine. But they continue to persist in unhappiness. And one of the things that I respect so deeply about the people that I serve is that they could have given up on themselves and on the possibility of having a better future long ago. But they're willing to do whatever it takes. Anything. They're so coachable because they're committed to a better future. And so I see all types of prisons. If you choose not to forgive yourself and you beat yourself up every day, when people don't forgive themselves, I say, what's that tape of unforgiveness that plays in your head? And it's usually a tape of, you suck. You deserve this. You're never going to have a better future. And I say, would you allow a stranger to come up to you and talk to you that way on the street? Most people would say no. And I say, why do you talk to yourself like that every day? You're locking yourself in a head of these shaming thoughts. And a lot of times we are the ones who continue those thoughts. Those thoughts are comfortable, like a wool coat sometimes, and we don't want to shed them. So sometimes keeping a job that we hate, staying in a relationship that is abusive or that is unhealthy for us, all of that can be easier and more comfortable than change. Change is scary. Indeed.
Well, a lot of these prisoners that you work with get this second chance, or as you put it, this first chance, eventually outside of prison, but not all of them do. So for the prisoners that are sentenced for life, they're going to be behind bars the rest of their lives. How do you give them hope?
So, yeah, first I want to be clear that only 5% of people in America are sentenced for life and are never coming home. 5%. And we have about that. Maybe we have 5 or 10% of our program serves lifers who don't have the possibility of parole. But I believe that it is entirely possible to live a life of dignity and purpose even while you're incarcerated. And if you saw some of the amazing men and women that we serve who are facing life or just facing another 10 or 20 years in prison, if you saw the way that they use every minute that they have in the day to invest in others and younger folks who are going home, I think you'd be really inspired by that. We have a program that we're working on developing right now called the Marathon. And it's a program where the entrepreneurship skills that we teach them that normally they use when they get out and are released into our post-release incubator, they can use the entrepreneurship skills to start a nonprofit, a program inside prison. So while you're locked up, you're not allowed to start a for-profit company, but you can certainly start a program that makes a difference. And in some of our prisons, some of our lifers or long-termers have already started programs like we have a guy who teaches art to other people and is beautifying the environment. We have a guy who does GED training to help others get their GEDs. We have an anger management, a homicide prevention program. We have a youth mentoring program. These guys are taking every ounce of effort and time, and they're channeling it into something beautiful. Maybe the most notorious prison in America, it's called Pelican Bay State Prison. I just ran a kindness competition there, where I gave them a point system and they got points for acts of kindness that were above and beyond. So if they did an act of kindness for someone within their race, they got 2 points. Someone outside their race, 4 points. An act of kindness toward a uniformed officer, which is almost unheard of because it's such an us versus them mentality, they got 20 points. We even have a program in solitary confinement at Pelican Bay. And over a 2-month period, we had one of our incarcerated EITs who racked up more than 9,000 points while in solitary confinement. One of his acts of kindness, 2 times a year, he gets $100. And especially in solitary, the guys are not always fed the best. So that $100, he's able to redeem it at the little commissary store. And he chose at Christmas to give away $100 to the Salvation Army. I can't tell you how sacrificial that is for him to choose to do that. And so some of your listeners might think, oh, well, these guys have nothing else to do all day. Well, that's not really true. They have jobs while they're in prison, not in solitary confinement. They don't. And they have many other choices. They could choose to engage in criminal activity or they could choose to waste away. But instead, they're taking the choice. They have the courage to act out in kindness, even in the most unconventional form, even showing kindness to correctional officers. And that is what makes me respect them very much.
If we look at the prison population as a whole, I think recidivism rates are somewhere in the neighborhood of 75, maybe 80%. The graduates of your program, it's more like 5%, I think.
It's currently still less than 5%.
So did you ever, in your wildest dreams, imagine that you'd had that kind of success?
Well, PEP, the program I started in Texas 14 years later, still has a recidivism rate of only 7%. Our recidivism is remarkably low. The reason for it is because when people get out of prison, we get them in jobs. Because while they're in prison, we teach them how to shake a hand, look someone in the eye, show up on time, tie a tie, and they get great resumes, and they have these Baylor MBA certificates. And nobody likes prison. Prison's not a place that people want to return to. But if we don't provide people in prison with a viable alternative, a legal economic means, then they're going to go back to the only thing that they know. And most of the people I serve are not going to go be homeless. They were accomplished as drug dealers and they were able to make money that way. But they don't want to continue doing that. They recognize that selling drugs or engaging in gangs or violence, they recognize that that's not good for society and it's not good for them or their children or anybody else. So they want another path. And so, yes, I'm proud that our recidivism rate is so low. But on the other hand, many people measure success in this industry just by how low is your recidivism rate. And that's like asking, how often do you fail, or how often do you not fail? And I know very well that the men and the women and the youth that we serve are capable of so much more than just staying out of prison. And so recidivism, I hope, is low recidivism is a byproduct of the great work that we're doing, because we've had nearly 200 people start legal businesses when they get out. Their businesses have been so successful that they've created 400 employment opportunities for other people. And we have a 95% employment rate. And you should see the amazing parents and voices and role models. And a lot of our people start nonprofits after they get out. They're capable of creating so much beauty in this world. It's a redemptive beauty that I'm really proud of.
These success stories are unbelievable. And I'm going to put you on the spot here. Like, I know it's impossible to pick your favorite child, but if you think about all of the alumni of your program over the years, is there any one graduate that stands out as maybe the greatest triumph? If you think about the low of the low they had getting them into prison, and then the high of the high after prison, what they're able to accomplish, does anyone stand out in particular?
I love it when our release graduates actually start businesses, but they don't have to start a business to be a success in our book, and not everyone's going to succeed at starting a business. I mean, the trials that they overcome when they get out, I can't believe their staying power, their grit in doing so. So do you want me to share someone who went from doing time to starting a company, or someone who got...
Yes.
Okay. So I'll just share our best known success story. His name is Cos Marte, and he did 5 years in prison and in New York State. And he even did time in solitary. And when he went to prison, he was so overweight that doctors told him he would die in the 5 years that he was serving.
He was in prison for what?
For a kingpin drug dealing case. He was selling $2 million a year in drugs at the age of 19. And so he was out of shape, and he decided he didn't want to die in prison. So in solitary confinement, he came up with a workout regimen that helped him to lose 70 pounds in 6 months. And then when he got released from solitary back to the general population yard of the prison, he helped 20 inmates lose a combined 1,000 pounds. And then he got out of prison, and with Defy's help, he started ConBody, which is a prison-style fitness boot camp. And today he has more than 14,000 customers. He has an online platform that serves customers, I think, in nearly 30 countries. We've helped him to raise $250,000 in capital, and he's hired 15 or 16 people with criminal histories. And so if you want to go get fit, then go to ConBody, conbodylive.com also, and you'll be working out with your, quote, cellie. And people out of prison will be yelling at you to make sure that you get into the best shape of your life. And it's amazing. In fact, Saks Fifth Avenue needed more foot traffic. So they opened up a ConBody store inside Saks. Most of Cos's customers are women. And so they go there and they go shopping at Saks, and then they also get fit in the process. I'll tell you what really makes me so proud of Cos is not just these metrics that I'm sharing with you about his financial successes, or how many people he's hired or served. It's that whenever I ask Cos to give back in any way, he does. So Cos came back to Pelican Bay with me, and he went into solitary confinement. There it's called the SHU. And he shared with our guys in the SHU his SHU to CEO success story. And he did a ConBody workout. So the guys were in their shoes, and Cos did the workout with them there. And I can't tell you how inspiring it is for people who are currently incarcerated to hear his story and to say, I could be just like Cos. Because many of the businesses that are started by our graduates, they're all businesses that we make them start businesses that take less than $20,000 to get off the ground, and that they can get to profitability within 3 months. So most of them are simple concepts that get legal, fast money in their pockets. But when they see a success story like Cos, it's so inspiring, because every other day you're told you're going to come right back here. Everybody else comes back here. No one wants to hire you. And that just reinforces more negative behavior. But when they see role models like Cos, it makes me really, really proud. And that's how we're changing things.
I want to go back to you for a minute, and this discussion around what you were able to do and so many of us aren't able to do in terms of just redirect your life. The way you position it in the book is you say that self-preservation is a greater need than fulfillment. And when I look at your life, it took a tremendous amount of courage for you to walk away from that job So you clearly chose fulfillment over self-preservation, if that's the right way to frame it. What gave you the strength and courage to not just see the light, but actually follow that path?
Yeah. So my book called A Second Chance, the subtitle is A Second Chance for You, for me, and for the rest of us. And I talk about how all of us can get our second chances, not just the people that I work with in prison. And I talk about how, if they've been convicted of murder and have served 20 years and then can choose to reinvent themselves, so can you. You don't have as many disadvantages probably as they do, and they have the courage to do it. I was inspired to reinvent myself even after my scandal when I see their courage every day. Their courage inspires me to fight for them. After my scandal, I moved back to New York City. I got an offer to go back into venture capital. And the minute that I got that offer in hand, I felt like a sellout because I know why God has put me on earth. I know my purpose. I know what makes me feel so alive. It's just that I was feeling so insecure, wondering what people would say about me. And yeah, starting an organization like Defy, it's a lot of risk. And I'm grateful that I care about fulfillment more than I care about self-preservation. Self-preservation, making a solid income and not taking risks is more important to most people because change is so scary. But I challenge readers in the book to think, what's more important to you? And if you're so miserable right now, what do you have to lose? I mean, I guess you do have something to lose. If you had to leave your job to find another job that made you fulfilled, you would have to lose your income. And that's why people choose to stay miserable every day. That's why people stay stagnant in miserable relationships every single day. But I think life is too short for that. And for me, when I ask these CEOs, I ask myself this all the time. If I died today, why would my life matter? What am I doing with every day of my time? I have found that for me, and I've heard this from so many other people as well, that we feel the most alive when we are investing sacrificially in the lives of other people, when we're pouring into them. So most of the very successful CEOs that I work with, they don't find their satisfaction from selling another company for another $500 million. But when I hear sometimes that they say that they hired someone, they took a chance on someone who otherwise couldn't get a job. And when they hear that that person was able to then provide for their family, that's satisfying. I go through many hardships in my role, and running this is really hard. And I kind of wouldn't wish it upon anybody, but I would if you have what it takes to face a lot of adversity. But you don't have to jump ship from your whole job. In the book, I call it your generous hustle. How can you find a way that you can contribute meaningfully to the world in a positive way? And many people make excuses all the time for why they don't have enough money, they don't have enough time, they don't have enough education, they don't have enough this and that. And then they stay miserable. So I like to challenge people and say, actually, you have just what it takes to make a difference. And sometimes making a difference is as small as walking by someone on the street and smiling and just saying hello. Even acknowledging another human being makes a difference in somebody's life. So we all can do that. Figure out what level you want to make that difference on.
You make this really interesting point in the book about happiness. We're all searching for it. And you say that you're really driven, as you've pointed out here, of wanting to make a difference in people's lives. So you're clearly passionate about your work, but it doesn't mean that you're happy every moment. So at the end of the day, it's hard work. You make a lot of sacrifices. Things don't always go the way you want them to. You have a lot of disappointments along the way. It's not like you're in this constant euphoric state, but you're fulfilled, and it gives you meaning and purpose. It seems like so many of us are searching for this elusive form of happiness, and it just doesn't exist.
I find that there's a certain level of things that we need to do for ourselves to take care of our basic needs. But typically the way that many people try to find happiness is by doing more for me. All about me. And if I buy this new dress, or if I buy this new car, or if I get this, and if I acquire more things for me, or if I have more friends on social media, I'll be happier. And in my experience of working with very successful people who have found fulfillment and others who have not, what I find is the way to get to happiness is that it's less about me. And it's actually about putting me second, putting my needs behind the needs of others. That's to find fulfillment and peace and purpose. I would say I probably have more unhappy days in my life than I have happy days, because this work is so hard, and I can make it sound really nice and rosy and exciting. Like, I don't like fundraising, and I fundraise every day, but I have a sign that I carry around with me that says, if I love my EITs, I will keep fundraising as my responsibility so that they can have the opportunity that they've been praying for. And when I see that somebody else has started to believe in themselves, when they say, I was about to give up on life or myself, but now I've forgiven myself. Now I'm starting a company. Today, my daughter told me that she forgave me, that she loves me. I live for that. I receive happiness from their happiness. And I'm not saying that I'm an unhappy person. I'm just saying that this is very, very difficult work, but more than fleeting happiness that I could get by going to a party or buying myself a nice dress, I choose this. And I would choose it all every day, all the time. It's what I do with my life.
I mean, life is hard. And frankly, if it wasn't hard climbing the mountain, it wouldn't be so sweet when you reach the summit. I got to say, it was an unbelievable book on so many levels. Again, it's called A Second Chance for you, for me, and for the rest of us. When I was reading some of those stories, a kid that was abandoned at 3 years of age in a dumpster by his own mother, and things we can never, ever possibly, understand and relate to, but we really need to at the end of the day. And when I mentioned earlier about, as a society, we are not empathetic to that population, I was one of them. And I read your book, and it honestly opened my eyes and reframed how I think about it. It's incredible that there was someone like you that saw that and didn't just see it, but did something about it. This has been such an honor to hear your story and hear the story of so many of these people that you work with, these incredible people that are having the second chance. Thanks for doing what you do. Thank you for being on the show. This has been a real pleasure.
I'm really thankful, Glenn, that you took the time to read the book. By the way, 100% of the proceeds of the book go directly to Defy, not to my pocket. So thank you for reading it. And I hope that other people will also pick it up and think about not just the population that I serve, but about giving yourself a second chance, or giving a second chance to someone in your family who has wronged you before, and how to go about doing that. So I'm grateful, Glenn, that you made time and that you are opening your heart to possibilities of a better future through second chances. Thank you. Thank you. And I would love for you to come to prison. P.S.
Wonderful. Great. Thanks.
Thanks, Glenn.
Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. You can subscribe to the show at iTunes, Stitcher, and theartofexcellence.com. I've got one small favor to ask. If you like the show, please take a minute and leave us a review on iTunes. I would really appreciate that. I'll see you next time.